Progreso, Coahuila, northern Mexico, about 80 miles from the Texas border. The evening of the 7th of October, 2012. It is a Sunday. In this small town of a few thousand people, families are gathered at the local field, watching a baseball game. It is the most ordinary scene imaginable. Children, parents, a Sunday evening in rural Mexico. A patrol of Mexican Marines is moving through the area. They are not hunting anyone in particular. They are responding to a routine report complaints about armed men seen nearby. It is the kind of call that patrols in northern Mexico answer every week. The Marines approach a suspicious pickup truck to search it, and the men inside answer with grenades. The firefight erupts right next to the baseball field. Families dive for cover as gunfire and explosions tear through the Sunday evening. Local reporting would describe scenes of panic and terror as the battle unfolds beside the game. Inside the vehicle, the men fight with a ferocity far beyond that of ordinary gunmen when it is over. The Marines recover assault rifles, a grenade launcher, a dozen grenades, and a rocket launcher with 2 rockets. A war chest in a pickup truck in a town of a few thousand people. 2 of the armed men are killed. 1 Marine dies with them. At first, no one knows who the dead men are. The bodies are taken to a funeral home in the nearby town of Sabinas. A forensics team arrives, photographs the corpses, takes fingerprints, performs an autopsy. Routine procedure for unidentified men killed in a shootout. And then the fingerprints come back. 3 prints, taken from the right hand of one of the dead men, match a name at the very top of Mexico's most wanted list. A name with a $7 million bounty attached to it. The man killed at a baseball game in a chance encounter with a routine patrol is Heriberto Lazcano. El Lazca, the executioner, the supreme leader of Los Zetas, the most feared cartel in Mexico. The government has just achieved, almost by accident, its biggest takedown in 6 years of war. The president himself will hail it within days. But this story is only beginning. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, while the government is still preparing its announcement, a group of armed men storms the funeral home in Sabinas. They force the funeral director, at gunpoint, to load the corpses into a hearse and drive them away into the dark. By morning, the body of the most powerful drug lord Mexico had killed in its entire war is gone. It has never been found. This is the story of the man in that pickup truck, the soldier who deserted his country's elite forces to build the most brutal cartel of the modern era, the executioner who ruled an empire of terror, and the corpse that vanished into the night, leaving behind a mystery that has never been solved. To understand who Heriberto Lazcano was, you have to start with what he was trained to be. Because before he was a cartel boss, he was one of the most highly trained soldiers in Mexico. Lazcano was born in 1974 in the state of Hidalgo, into modest circumstances. As a young man, he joined the Mexican army, and he did not remain an ordinary soldier for long. He was selected for the military's elite special forces, the airborne group known as the GAIF, an elite unit created to be the sharp edge of the Mexican state. According to accounts of his career, he received training of the highest order, including instruction influenced by foreign special forces programs, combat tactics, explosives, high-caliber weapons, counterinsurgency. He served during the government's response to an armed uprising in the south of the country in the mid-90s. He was, in every sense, a product of the state's finest military machinery. And then, the state lost him. The unit Lazcano belonged to had been created, in part, to fight the very world he would come to rule. Mexico's special forces were the government's answer to insurgency and organized crime, the most capable, most trusted instrument the state possessed. But that capability came with a market value. On one side of the line, an elite soldier earned a modest military salary. On the other side, the cartels were offering many times more for exactly the same skills. In the late 1990s, that arithmetic began to pull the sharpest soldiers across the line, and Lazcano was among the first and most consequential of them. The state had invested years and fortunes in making him lethal, and the Gulf Cartel acquired all of it for the price of a payroll entry. It remains one of the most catastrophic personnel losses in the history of any government's war on crime. In the late 1990s, Lazcano deserted. Like a small group of his fellow Special Forces soldiers, he crossed over to the other side, recruited by the Gulf Cartel, then the dominant criminal power of eastern Mexico, whose boss wanted something no cartel had ever had before: a private army of actual soldiers. That group of deserters became Los Zetas. Each man took a code name, the letter Z, followed by a number indicating his rank. The founder and first commander was Zetor-1. Lazcano, among the earliest members, became Zetor-3. We have told the story of Los Zetas on this channel before, how a bodyguard unit of ex-Special Forces soldiers became the most feared cartel in Mexico. But this is the story of the man who, more than any other, made them what they became. Because the original commander, Zet-1, was killed in 2002. His successor was captured not long after. And by 2004, the leadership of Los Zetas had passed to the quiet, disciplined former Special Forces sergeant from Hidalgo. Lazca was now the commander. His path to that command says everything about the world the Zetas inhabited. By some accounts, in his earliest years in the trade, Lazcano had operated simultaneously as a police officer and a cartel enforcer, wearing the state's uniform by day while serving the Gulf Cartel's interests. A living example of how thin the line between the two sides had become. Within the Zetas, he was a founding member of the Inner Circle, one of the original deserters, trusted with the work that required the coldest hands. And when the leadership above him was destroyed, the founder killed by the army in 2002, his successor captured Lazcano did not seize power in a coup. He simply inherited it, the way command passes in a military unit when the officers above fall. It was the Army's logic, transplanted whole into the underworld. The chain of command held, and the next man stepped up. And under his command, Los Zetas became something Mexico had never seen. His nickname inside the organization tells you most of what you need to know. They called him El Verdugo, the executioner. He had earned it through a reputation for personally dispensing the organization's most severe punishments, and for a coldness that unsettled even the hardened men around him. Where other cartel bosses were flamboyant, the parties, the celebrity, the gold-plated weapons, Lazcano remained what the army had made him: a soldier, disciplined, methodical, almost invisible. He gave no interviews, cultivated no legend, appeared in almost no photographs. For years, the most feared man in Mexico was little more than a name and a blurry image. But his fingerprints, the same fingerprints that would one day identify his body, were all over the transformation of the Mexican drug war. It was under Lazcano that Los Zetas perfected the doctrine that changed everything. The idea that a criminal organization should not merely bribe the state and move its product quietly, but should function as an occupying army. Under his leadership, the Zetas recruited from the ranks of the military and police, not only in Mexico, but from the special forces of neighboring Guatemala. They built training camps, They armed themselves with military-grade weapons, and they expanded on a model no cartel had used before. Instead of controlling a smuggling route, they seized territory itself, taxing every criminal activity within it, extorting every business, controlling everything that moved. And they enforced that control with a level of demonstrative cruelty that redefined what the drug war meant. Under Lazcano, the Zetas did not hide their violence, they advertised it. Bodies were displayed in public, marked with the letter Z, as messages to rivals and warnings to everyone else. Atrocities that shocked the entire world were traced to the organization he commanded. The massacre of 72 migrants in the state of Tamaulipas in 2010, killed for refusing to work for the cartel. Mass graves. A prison break in which more than 150 inmates walked out of a state facility straight into the cartel's ranks. Lazcano himself was suspected in hundreds of killings, among them and the murder of a crusading newspaper editor in Tijuana, gunned down in front of his own children. None of this was random. That is the truly chilling part. The terror was a strategy, administered by a man trained in the logic of military operations. Fear was the product, and Lazcano manufactured it with a soldier's efficiency. Communities did not merely fear the Zetas, they understood that the ordinary rules, the ones even other cartels loosely followed, did not apply to them. Other organizations moved drugs and bribed officials. The Zetas, under the executioner, waged war on society itself. The Mexican state, for its part, struggled to answer a threat unlike any it had faced. A conventional cartel could be fought with arrests and seizures, but the Zetas under Lazcano were a military problem. Wearing a criminal disguise, an organization with better training than most police forces, heavier weapons than some army units, and a commander who thought in terms of operations and terrain. The government's response, increasingly, was to send its own elite forces above all the Marines, the naval special forces that had proven hardest for the cartels to corrupt. The war in the Northeast became, in effect, special forces against special forces, the state's remaining elite hunting the elite it had lost. It was a grim symmetry, and Lazcano had created it. And it is why, when the end finally came for him, it would come at the hands of the Marines, the mirror image of the man he had once been. And then, in 2010, Lazcano committed the act that defined the second half of his story. He turned on his masters. For a decade, Los Zetas had served the Gulf Cartel first as bodyguards, then as enforcers, then as an increasingly independent army that was, in truth, more powerful than the cartel it protected. The arrangement had been fraying for years, especially after the Gulf Cartel's boss, the man who had created the Zetas, was captured and extradited to the United States. The soldiers no longer respected the traffickers they served. The traffickers feared the soldiers they had hired. In early 2010, the alliance shattered, and Lazcano led Los Zetas into open war against the Gulf Cartel, the organization that had created them. The bodyguard turned on the boss. The sword turned on the hand that forged it. It was one of the great betrayals in the history of the Mexican underworld, and it unleashed a war across northeastern Mexico so ferocious that entire towns emptied. And the region along the Texas border became one of the most dangerous places on earth. The war with the Gulf Cartel also reshaped the map of alliances across the entire country. The Gulf, desperate against its former enforcers, turned to its old enemies, including the Sinaloa cartel, creating a national coalition against the Zetas. Lazcano's organization, in turn, allied itself with the remnants of other cartels that hated Sinaloa. What had been a regional rupture became a nationwide alignment. Nearly the entire criminal map of Mexico polarized around the question of the Zetas, for or against. Few individual decisions in the history of the drug war redrew the battlefield as completely as Lazcano's decision to turn on his creators. And it was in the furnace of that war in the years of fighting that followed the split that the organization's darkest atrocities took place, as the Zetas answered every setback with escalations designed to horrify, and Lazcano's Zetas won territory on a staggering scale. At their peak under his command, Los Zetas were, by territory, the largest cartel in Mexico, their operations stretching across 11 states. Their name feared in every corner of the country, their reach extending into Central America. The deserter from Hidalgo, the quiet sergeant, now commanded a criminal army that rivaled the Sinaloa cartel itself for national dominance. And the two superpowers of the Mexican underworld ground against each other in a war that consumed the country. The United States put $5 million on his head. Mexico added millions more. He was, alongside El Chapo, one of the two most wanted men in the entire hemisphere. But the empire the executioner built carried a flaw at its core, the same flaw that runs through every story we have told on this channel. It was held together by force, and force invites rivals. And by 2012, the greatest threat to Heriberto Lazcano was no longer the government or the Gulf Cartel, or even Sinaloa. It was his own second-in-command, Miguel Ángel Trevino Morales, Z40, the man whose story we have told before, the ruthless regional boss who had risen through the Zetas, not as a soldier, but as pure predator. By 2012, according to analysts and law enforcement officials, a rift had opened at the top of Los Zetas. Lazcano's health was said to be failing. Much of the day-to-day control of the organization had already shifted to Trevino. Rumors swirled through the underworld of factions forming, of betrayals within the betrayers, of senior Zetas being handed to the authorities by their own comrade. One senior Zeta boss, arrested weeks before Lazcano's death, was said to have been at war with Trevino's faction. Some speculated openly about who inside the organization might be feeding information to the government. The most feared cartel in Mexico was beginning to eat itself. And its supreme leader, the executioner, the man who had taught Mexico what terror meant, was quietly losing his grip on the machine he had built. Which brings us back to that Sunday evening in Progreso, and to the strangest part of this entire story. Because when the end came for Heriberto Lazcano, it did not come the way it came for the other kingpins in this saga. There was no months-long intelligence operation. No informant close to the boss. No elite raid on a fortified compound. The most wanted man in Mexico, the commander of a criminal army, was killed by a routine patrol responding to a routine complaint outside a baseball game, in a town most Mexicans had never heard of. Think about what that means. A man with a $7 million price on his head, hunted for years by two governments, protected by an organization built from Special Forces soldiers, and he dies in a chance encounter. In a pickup truck with a single bodyguard, carrying a rocket launcher but no army. Some analysts saw in that scene the evidence of how far he had already fallen, the supreme leader of Los Zetas, moving through the countryside with almost no protection, perhaps already pushed to the margins of his own organization by the rival who was taking it from him. The Marines did not even know who they had killed. The bodies went to the funeral home in Sabinas as unidentified casualties. It was only the fingerprints, matched against government records, that revealed the truth, the records of a Special Forces soldier, taken by the very state he had once served and then betrayed. The army that had trained him identified him in death. And then, before the government could even parade its victory, the body vanished. At around 2 in the morning, armed men entered the funeral home. They forced the funeral director to load the 2 corpses into a hearse and drive them away. No shots fired, no chaos, a clean, disciplined operation executed in the small hours. Before the world even knew that Lazca was dead, the state attorney general announced it at a press conference that landed like a bombshell. The most important body in Mexico had been stolen from under the government's nose. The working explanation was, in its way, the most fitting epitaph the executioner could have received. Lazcano was special forces, observers noted, and the Zetas had inherited the creed of the military units that birthed them. You do not leave a comrade behind. Even in death, the code held. According to widely reported accounts, the men who took the body were sent by the organization itself by some tellings on the orders of Zeta 40, the very rival who had been supplanting him. The cartel came for its commander one last time. But the theft had another consequence, one the government understood immediately. Without a body, there could be no absolute certainty. Mexico had been embarrassed before it had announced the deaths and captures of major traffickers and been forced to walk them back. Aware of the skepticism, the Navy released its evidence. The photographs of the corpse on the autopsy table, the 3 matching fingerprints from the right hand. The president praised the Marines and declared the evidence clear, though observers noted that even he, in that first speech, stopped just short of an unqualified declaration that the leader of Los Zetas was dead. Into that sliver of doubt, the legends poured. If the body was gone, who could say for certain? Whispers spread in the border towns, in the prisons, on the narco blogs that Lazca was alive, that the fingerprints were fabricated or the dead man a double, that the executioner had staged the perfect exit, officially dead, hunted by no one, free. The rumors were almost certainly false, the fingerprint match was real, and no credible evidence of his survival has ever surfaced. But a vanished corpse is a powerful thing. To this day, the final resting place of Heriberto Lazcano, if he rests anywhere at all, has never been publicly confirmed. The man who made bodies disappear across Mexico became, in the end, the most famous disappeared body in the country. What followed his death confirmed how much had already changed. There was no war of succession, because the succession had, in effect, already happened. Z-40 took uncontested command of Los Zetas. The outcome analysts had seen coming for months. Some experts predicted the organization would barely feel the loss. The executioner, they said, had already been reduced to a figurehead in his final year. Within 10 months, Trevino himself was captured on a highway outside Nuevo Laredo. His brother followed 2 years later, and the organization Lazcano had built the army that had terrorized a nation fractured and decayed, splintering into warring remnants until its surviving heart was reborn under a new name on the border. The Cartel del Noreste, whose story we have already told. The empire of the executioner outlived him by barely a year in any recognizable form. The terror he manufactured outlived him everywhere. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never be answered. Where is the body of Heriberto Lazcano, who ordered it taken? Where was it carried in that hearse in the dark? And does anyone alive today know where it lies? Was the man in the pickup truck in Progreso already a deposed king, a commander pushed aside by his own deputy, moving with a single bodyguard because the army he built no longer answered to him? Did someone inside Los Zetas place him in the path of that patrol, one final betrayal inside an organization born from betrayal? And the question that lingers beneath all the others: how does a state train a man to be one of its finest soldiers, lose him to the enemy, spend a decade hunting him, and find him only by accident at a baseball game on a Sunday evening? Some of those answers may lie in files never made public, or in the memories of men long dead. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: Heriberto Lazcano was the purest expression of the darkest turn in the entire Mexican drug war, the moment the state's own weapons were turned against it. Every skill he used to terrorize a country, the country had given him. The training, the discipline, the doctrine of war, all of it came from the army he deserted. He took the tools of the state and built an anti-state, an organization that did not corrupt the government so much as replace it, town by town, with an occupation founded on fear. He commanded the largest cartel in Mexico. He betrayed the organization that created him and nearly destroyed it. He redefined, for an entire generation, what a cartel could be. And then he died almost anonymously, beside a baseball field, killed by a patrol that had no idea who he was, and his own men stole him back from the state one last time, carrying the executioner into the darkness, to a grave no one has ever found. In the Mexican drug trade, every boss eventually falls, but most of them, at least, leave a body behind. Lazca did not even leave that. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand, not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.